Today on the John Ankerberg Show, where did we come from? How did we get here? What brought us into existence? In most high schools and colleges, Charles Darwin's theory of evolution is presented as an established fact of science rather than a theory. But today, many leading scientists in their peer-reviewed literature are rejecting Darwin's theory for many reasons. One of the most important being the Cambrian explosion of animals, where complex, fully formed animals suddenly just appeared in the fossil record with no prior ancestors before them. Why do some scientists believe that these animals present compelling evidence of an all-powerful designing intelligence in the history of life? My guest today is Dr. Stephen Meyer, who received his PhD in the philosophy of science from Cambridge University, as the author of the best-selling book, Darwin's Doubt. We invite you to join us. Welcome to our program. I'm John Ankerberg. Thanks for joining me. Our topic is, why are many scientists today rejecting the standard textbook theory of evolution, known as neo-Darwinism, that we all learn in high school and college textbooks? And where did the problems with contemporary evolutionary theory begin? For the last few weeks, we've been looking at the theory of evolution and the scientific problems confronting it with scientist and philosopher Dr. Stephen Meyer. Dr. Meyer is a former geophysicist who received his PhD in the philosophy of science from Cambridge University. And he's written two best-selling books, Signature in the Cell and Darwin's Doubt. And Dr. Meyer, we're really glad that you're here. And here's your beautiful book, Darwin's Doubt. Tell me, what's the main point of the book?
Well, in the book, I describe a doubt that Darwin had about the adequacy of his own theory. And his doubt concerned an event in the history of life known as the Cambrian explosion. And we've been talking about it in previous episodes. The Cambrian explosion, again, is the event in the history of life in which the first complex forms of animal life arise very abruptly in the fossil record. And Darwin recognized that this challenged his picture of the history of life because he thought that complex life should arise gradually through a long process of small incremental variation accumulating over time. And instead what we see is the sudden appearance of these major forms of animal life. In the book, I talk about two mysteries. The first mystery is the mystery of the missing ancestral fossils, the ones that Darwin thought should be there to document that process of gradual change, but those are the ones that are missing. And then I talk about a deeper mystery, and that's the mystery of how the evolutionary process would have built these animals. And that mystery, I explain, has become very much more acute because of everything we've learned about the importance of information, in particular genetic information, for building new forms of animal life. And so the book has an overarching argument as well as a story. And that argument is that the theory of intelligent design provides a better explanation for the origin of the information needed to build these Cambrian animals than any of the current materialistic evolutionary theories or models.
Yeah, and I would say that this book really created a storm in the public, all right? And what has been the response of the scientific critics?
Well, some of it's been kind of amusing, actually, because there was a major review of the book that was published a month and a half before the book was released by an evolutionary biologist at the University of Chicago named Jerry Coyne, and he claimed that I argued that baby Jesus made the animal phyla, which I actually didn't argue. And then there was a review that was released on the early in the morning, the first day the book was available for purchase. It was a 9,400-word review written by a paleontology grad student from the University of California, Berkeley. And it was clear that the grad student was critiquing what he thought I must have said or what I maybe had said in some previous article or something, but he could not possibly have read the book. And then a later review was published in the New Yorker drawing on this grad student's assessment of the book, which he clearly hadn't read. And so there was a number of reviews that I would regard as frivolous early on.
Yeah.
And yeah, go ahead.
I'm just saying, let's take some of them, okay? In your book, you show that neo-Darwinism cannot explain the origin of biological information. But some people say, aren't there other evolutionary theories that do so?
Well, there are other evolutionary theories beyond neo-Darwinism. And one of the things I show in the book, in chapters 15 and 16, is that these other evolutionary theories, in many cases, are improvements over neo-Darwinism, but they too failed to explain the origin of information. For example, there's a wonderful new evolutionary theory known as natural genetic engineering, and it's been put forward by really top cell biologist at the University of Chicago named James Shapiro, someone for whom I have great respect. And Shapiro has shown that the mutations that Darwinists rely on to account for new biological change are not actually random at all, but they instead seem to be under what he calls algorithmic control. There's a pre-programmed adaptive capacity in organisms that allows them to respond to various kinds of environmental stressors. And I think that's fascinating, and I think he's made a very good case that these types of directed mutations are occurring in response to various types of environmental challenges. But the question that Shapiro doesn't attempt to answer is the question of the origin of that pre-programming.
Where did it come from?
Where did that come from? And that, again, is an information question. And so I show in these later chapters in the book that, yes, there are new models of evolutionary theory, and that in part documents my claim that neo-Darwinism is dead. The standard textbook theory is no longer accepted by leading evolutionary biologists themselves. They're moving on to try to develop new mechanisms to explain the origin of form and information. But I also show that these new theories invariably either don't address the key question of the origin of biological information, or if they do, they simply presuppose prior unexplained sources of information and therefore leave the question unanswered as well.
Yeah, it seems like they've got a brick wall at the beginning and at the end. They don't know how to get the information, and once you have the information, you can't mess with it very much.
Well, we found that was true as well. In an earlier segment, we talked about the problem of these developmental gene regulatory networks, how these networks of genes full of information are critical to building animals and animal body plans in the right way, and yet you can't perturb these networks without destroying the process of development. So,
yeah, we've been talking about some of the critics here of your book, but there was one paleontologist that actually offered a suggestion or solution, a theory.
The key argument of the book concerns the origin of the information needed to build the animals. And finally, in September of 2013, the year the book was released, a review came out with a reviewer who attempted to address that key issue. And this was a review that was published in Science. Science is the largest science journal in America, and it was written by Charles Marshall, a leading evolutionary biologist and paleontologist at the University of California, Berkeley. And Marshall's review was critical, and yet also, I thought, respectful. And it was respectful in an important sense that I found a relief. He attempted to address the main argument of the book. And he said, look, Meyer's case depends upon the claim that the origin of new animal body plans requires vast amounts of novel genetic information. In fact, this isn't our present understanding. Our present understanding of morphogenesis, which just means body plan building, indicates that the new animal phyla were not made by new genes, but largely emerged through the rewiring of gene regulatory networks of already existing genes.
Yep.
Now that's a really interesting passage because he is attempting to refute the argument I'm making about the need for intelligent design to explain the origin of information, but he doesn't really explain the origin of information. He presupposes pre-existing sources of information. Number one, he presupposes the existence of gene regulatory networks, which we saw in a previous episode, are networks of interacting genes and their protein products. Well, all those genes contain genetic information. Plus, we know these gene regulatory networks act on other pre-existing genes to turn some on and turn others off at different times. And so that's another source of pre-existing genetic information. And thirdly, rewiring the genetic regulatory networks requires changes of code, more input of information, and in all three cases, Marshall doesn't explain where this information comes from, he just presupposes it. So I don't think you need a PhD in biology to see that he hasn't refuted the argument I made. Instead, he really begs the question. He just puts the problem of the origin of information back a little bit and says, well, there's all this pre-existing information that explains how the animals developed. In addition to all that, he suggests that the evolutionary process could rewire and alter these gene regulatory networks. And as we discussed in a previous episode, one of the things we know experimentally is that you can't perturb these networks of genes and expect animals to develop properly. Instead, if you alter these networks of genes, they're going to die. And so that's actually not even a plausible suggestion based on what we know experimentally.
Yeah, I also have to say that there are a lot of scientists that made some positive statements about the book. I mean, I read the one professor from the Max Planck University or Institute in Germany who said that it's the most accurate, comprehensive review of the scientific literature that he's seen in 40 years. I mean, what did that do for you?
Well, we were really pleased with some of the endorsements for the book that came in from, there was a Harvard professor of genetics, a leading Cambrian paleontologist who's published a book on the Cambrian explosion with Columbia University Press, this Professor Lonnig from the Max Planck Institute in Germany. So yeah, we've had supporters as well as critics.
Yeah, let's cruise on with some of the other objections that we hear a lot of times in the popular press, and they'll say that intelligent design is not science.
This is a very interesting objection because what you want to know about an idea is whether or not it's true or false. You don't want to know how to classify it, okay? So if we say that there's strong evidence that a designing intelligence acted in the history of life, and someone comes back and says it's not science, that's kind of an odd response. What they ought to say is, no, that's not true. The evidence points in the other direction. And rather than disputing the factual claim as being untrue, people have said, well, no, it's not science. It's religion, or it's philosophy, or it's pseudoscience, or it's something else. And so the first thing I'd say about that objection is it's really not on point. What we want to know is whether the theory is true or not. Now, I would also say there's every good reason to regard the theory of intelligent design as a scientific theory. As we discussed in a previous episode, in formulating the case for intelligent design, I self-consciously used the same method of scientific reasoning that Charles Darwin used in The Origin of Species. And so if you want to say that the theory of intelligent design is unscientific, you would have to say that Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection, which he justified using an historical scientific method, is also unscientific. So I don't think actually the attempt to classify it as unscientific actually works, but it is kind of an odd claim. The issue is whether intelligent design is true or not. I think we make a good case that there's good reason to believe that it is providing us the best explanation and most likely to be true.
Yeah, tell the folks about what we said last week for those that missed it about looking at Darwin's mentor, Charles Lyell, and then why is this a historical scientific theory?
Right, well, the theory of intelligent design and Darwinian theory, or various materialistic evolutionary theories, are both trying to answer the same question. How do these complex forms of animal life arise in the history of life? What caused them to come into existence? So they're both
in the past.
They're in the past, in the remote past. So they're both causal theories about events that happened in the remote past. And intelligent design is, the theory of intelligent design is affirming or inferring that there was an intelligent cause that played a role in the origin of the information necessary to build these forms of animal life. Neo-Darwinism and other materialistic theories of evolution say the opposite. Those theories are saying, well, an undirected material process produced the form and information that we see arising in the history of the past. These are two competing explanations of the same phenomena. One isn't scientific and the other religious, or one philosophical and the other pseudoscience, or something like that. They're not two different types of things. They're two different answers to the same question. So if one is scientific, the other is also scientific, but providing a competing scientific explanation.
Yeah, I think that's something that's very important for people to understand. Let's go back to the point that intelligent design is not a testable theory. I'm thinking more and more that that's not true because you're testing it all kinds of ways.
Well, that's right. One of the reasons that people say intelligent design isn't science is they say it's not testable. But they have a very narrow and inappropriate notion of testability, and that is that you must test things in a laboratory under controlled laboratory conditions. But that's not how you test historical scientific theories. Historical scientific theories use a method of reasoning known as the method of multiple competing hypotheses, where scientists propose multiple possible explanations for an event in the remote past, and then they test the credibility of those hypotheses against our knowledge of cause and effect in the present. And that's exactly what intelligent design as a theory does. It proposes an intelligent agent acting to generate information as the explanation for the origin of information that arises in the remote past. It then tests that idea against our knowledge of cause and effect and shows that there's only one known cause of the origin of information in our present experience, and that cause is intelligence. So intelligent design meets the key test of what's called causal adequacy. It proposes a cause which is known to produce the effect in question. And there are other ways that you can test historical scientific theories as well, and I show in my book that there are actually 3 separate types of tests, and the intelligent design is testable in each of those relevant ways. And so it meets the test of, or it meets the criterion of testability, and there's therefore every good reason to regard it as a scientific theory.
Okay, and then the big one is that people say, hey, intelligent design is religion masquerading as science.
Right, and I think the idea that intelligent design is religion, not science, confuses the basis of the theory of intelligent design with the possible implications of the theory. And the basis of the theory of intelligent design is the scientific evidence that we've been looking at. The sudden appearance of the major groups of animals in the fossil record, the evidence of digital information stored in the DNA molecule, and many other classes of evidence that I talk about in my books. So the basis of the theory is evidential. It's the evidence of the natural world, and also the use of a standard method of scientific reasoning, the very method that Darwin used. So the theory is based on a standard method of scientific reasoning and based on empirical evidence from the natural world. Therefore, it has a scientific basis. It may have larger worldview or philosophical or religious implications, but then again, so does Darwinism. Darwinism has larger implications that support a materialistic worldview, as many supporters of Darwinian theory have noted. And the theory of intelligent design may also have larger worldview or philosophical or even religious implications. If we see evidence of a designing intelligence in the history of life, that's consistent with what the theistic religions have said. They have affirmed that there is a designing agent that's responsible for creating the life forms we see around us, and they affirm that that agent is God. And so while the theory of intelligent design does not prove the existence of God, it affirms a tenet of the theistic religions, which say, yes, there was a designing mind, that mind is God, and so you can say that the theory of intelligent design has implications that are theistic friendly, that affirm a key idea that is affirmed by Jews and Christians and other people who believe in God. So that doesn't mean the theory is based on religion, but rather it has implications that are friendly to religious belief.
Yeah, talk about the verse that's over the door at Cambridge University, Psalm 111.
Well, I've made this clear in a lot of my public discussions of intelligent design. Intelligent design, again, is based on scientific evidence and a scientific method of reasoning, but it has larger implications that are friendly to faith. I happen to also be a person of faith. I'm a Christian, and one of the things I found inspirational when I was doing my PhD work in Cambridge was an inscription that had been placed on the door of the Cavendish Laboratory by the famed 19th century physicist James Clerk Maxwell. I think arguably one of the 3 great physicists in the history of science. And Maxwell was a devout Christian who wanted the inspiration for science to be publicly proclaimed, and the verse that he had inscribed on the door of the Cavendish Laboratory captured that in his view, and it was from Psalm 111. It said, "Great are the works of the Lord, sought out or studied by all who take pleasure therein." And for him, this was the inspiration for doing science, is that he believed the natural world had been created by God, and it had been made intelligible to the human mind because God was a rational creator, and he made our minds in a rational way so that we could understand the logic and design that he had built into the creation.
Yeah, I like the next part down there. He has caused his wonders to be remembered. What does that mean?
Well, when I sign my book to people who ask for a signature, and I often put that reference to the Psalm 111:4. It says, "He has caused his wonders to be remembered." And I, again, as a person of faith, find this kind of inspirational, because I think what we're looking at in the preservation of fossils, in our discovery of the DNA molecule, in the cosmic background radiation coming from the early echo of the beginning of the universe, I think we're seeing indications of the activity of the designer who made the world around us, and that we can discover these indications long after the fact of the events that we're studying, I think is pretty exciting. And it's kind of interesting that the psalmist indicated that such a thing might in fact be possible, that God has caused his wonders to be remembered.
Yeah, I love it. I want you to say an encouraging word to students who are going through school, grad school, PhD work, and they're in turmoil because of what they're being told on one side about how evolution impacts their faith, and now they're hearing this information. You can remember struggling with these issues. What would you say to encourage them in terms of following the evidence wherever it's going to lead them?
Well, I do have a lot of conversations with young scientists, grad students, students in their undergraduate years, and if they're skeptical of Darwinism, or if they have a religious faith, if they are theists of some kind, Jews, Christians, other, they will often feel that that they're the odd man out in their science classes. Many professors hold a naturalistic or materialistic worldview. The professors often think and will say openly that science properly understood supports such a worldview, or many of them are openly atheistic. We'll say, like Richard Dawkins believes that the science properly understood supports an atheistic perspective. And so students in classes with professors who are overtly opposed to any kind of theistic belief will often feel kind of intimidated and feel like maybe they're the person that didn't get the memo. And I think actually that this is a tremendous time to be going into science if you're interested in the big questions, and in particular if you have a theistic perspective, because I think we're seeing evidence of design not only in biology but also in physics and in cosmology. And I think that we often get the opposite perspective. You have the science popularizers are going to say, science supports the new atheism, or science makes belief in God untenable, or things like that. But when you dig into the evidence, I think there's a powerful case for intelligent design. And I personally think that the evidence doesn't just point to a designer generically, but instead there's a powerful case to be made from the evidence in biology, but also in physics and cosmology, for a designer that has the same attributes, the very attributes that Jews and Christians have long ascribed to God. From the biology, I think we see the evidence of a designing intelligence who's acted in the history of life. From the physics, I think we see in what was called the fine-tuning evidence of design from the very beginning of the universe. And in cosmology, I see evidence of a definite beginning to the universe that seems to point to the need for a transcendent form of causation, a cause beyond matter, space, time, and energy. And so when you add all that up, I think there's a very strong case for theism to be made. And you and I have talked about that in a previous series of interviews where I make that case in more detail. So right. I think rather than science properly understood undermining faith, I think it actually provides evidence for faith, maybe not a proof in the logically certain sense, but I think strong evidence that is very friendly to theistic belief. So I think it's a wonderful time to be a person of faith and a person who's interested in the natural world. And so I would really encourage students to get into science and also find out the other side of the argument. They're often, the universities are still dominated by a class of professors who are typically going to be more of a naturalistic or materialistic mindset. But there are a lot of really good scientists and philosophers of science who are looking at the questions in a different way and who are making a case for a more theistic-friendly understanding of science. And so dig in. It's an exciting time to be interested in these questions. Yeah. Dr. Meyer, I just got to conclude this program by saying a personal thank you to you for flying all the way from Seattle to come and do this program with us, for all of the time that you have studied. You've written these huge books that have had an impact on scientists around the world, and I just appreciate you coming here and sharing it with our audience. And folks, if you would like to have all of the 8 programs that we've done with Dr. Meyer, if you'd like to have Darwin's Dilemma, the movie, the clips we've been showing you, and if you would like to know a little bit more about this, go to our website or stay tuned. We'll tell you right now how you can get this.
If you would like to have all of the information in our new series, The Case for Intelligent Design, Charles Darwin admitted he did not know how the first cell came into existence. But today, molecular biologists have discovered that the human cell is not simple, but complex beyond belief. In the nucleus of each cell is the DNA molecule, which contains a storehouse of 3 billion characters of precise information in digital code. This digital code is crucial to the origin and function of all plants, animals, and humans. But where did this complex DNA code come from? And is an all-powerful, intelligent designer a better scientific explanation than Darwinism for the genetic information found in the DNA molecule? The 4 television programs in this series are available on DVD for a gift of $49. Then our second series is entitled The Mystery of the Missing Fossils, featuring Dr. Stephen Meyer. All 4 half-hour television programs are available on DVD for a gift of $49. You will see the astonishing evidence that has led scientists to conclude that fully developed, complex animals suddenly appeared on Earth during the Cambrian Age and had no prior ancestors, and why this fossil evidence goes directly against Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, why an all-powerful, intelligent designer is a better scientific explanation than Darwinism for the sudden appearance of fully formed animals in the fossil record. The 4 important programs in this series are available on DVD for a gift of $49. And then third, we are making available the documentary movie Darwin's Dilemma, which will transport you by state-of-the-art computer animation back in time to one of the great mysteries in the history of life, the geologically sudden appearance of dozens of major complex animal types in the fossil record without any trace of the gradual transition steps. You will learn of the vast intelligence God used in meticulously creating and designing the first animals. This documentary movie is available on DVD for a gift of $30. And finally, if you wish to order all 3 of these items together, that is both television series plus the documentary movie Darwin's Dilemma, they are available together in a special package for only $100. And to order now, you may call 1-800-805-3030. That's 1-800-805-3030. Or you may order these programs now at our website at jashow.org.